Welcome to Qatar. Welcome to the new DOHA debates. The first of a series of 6 debates on problems the world faces today.
We do not only face a refugee crisis, we also face a crisis of solidarity.
Wir haben so vieles geschafft, wir schaffen das.
We will build the wall.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you here in Doha. I've been traveling across several continents in recent years, not just to the countries that people are fleeing from around the world, but also to the places they're fleeing to the refugee camps, migrant camps that people end up in. And I've been struck by so many thoughts during this time, but one of them is that there are so many utopian dreams that occur. People dream that you could live in a borderless world on one hand. Other people pretend you could just stop anyone coming. These are impossible dreams, but somewhere in the middle of them is something we need to aim for. And one of the ways I've started to realize that we need to think about this is in the following terms, not about right or wrong or, good and bad. I'm a good person, you're a Nazi. It's too easy. What we need to think about with this is that we're in a situation with migration talking about competing virtues. There are 2 virtues in this whole debate that are in serious competition, not just between people, but within all of us. The first virtue, I would say, is the virtue of mercy, the desire to be merciful to our fellow human beings who are suffering. And we all feel that. Everybody should feel that. But there is also another virtue here, the virtue of justice. And that's not just justice for people fleeing countries, but justice for people in the countries that they are fleeing to. We can't ignore those 2 parts. We need to recognize that's what's going on here. This is why it's so difficult, and the debate goes down the middle of all of us. So look, there are so many questions we need to think about if we're going to address this. And I'm so glad, by the way, this isn't a debate, because this is a very not debatable issue. But why we need to think about this. Let me give you just 6 examples of things we need to think about much more deeply than we have. The first is this. I would suggest it is very obvious that the developing world cannot move to the developed world. So what do we do? Who can come? That's one part of that question. And the second part, which is much harder, who can't? We are very, very bad at having even a bit of that debate, but we need to. Secondly, what are the differences between people fleeing for their lives from a war zone and people fleeing serious, severe economic deprivation in, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa? Now, there are differences, but if you recognize that, then you've got to work out where along the way you would put your line for legitimate asylum claims. A third of people in sub-Saharan Africa polled last year by Gallup said they wanted to move and leave sub-Saharan Africa. So you've got to work out along this way, if you're going to have a sustainable asylum policy, who qualifies for it. And I would suggest we're not very good at having that.
So Douglas Murray comes right out of the gate and literally, kicks ass. I mean, look, I'm biased towards Douglas Murray. I'll admit my bias. But when he comes out, he basically says there's 6 questions that we have to, that at least let's start off by asking. And I'm going to point those out. He's already gone through 2. He initially said that the developing world can't move to the developed world. And he said there's 2 different types of virtue, and we've got to decide which of those virtues are we going to follow. And then he goes on to say that sub-Saharan Africa was polled, and 33%, a third. I'm surprised it's that low. I would have expected it would be nearly, nearly 80, 90%. That said they want to leave sub-Saharan Africa and move to the West, move to a first world country. But then those questions have to be asked. Who's going to be allowed to move? And the bigger question, who won't be allowed to come? And as he said, we're really, really bad at debating and discussing those questions. And there's absolutely no doubt about it. But rather than attacking countries, rather than attacking citizenship, rather than attacking sovereign nations and borders, he basically comes out and says, we've got to come up with some type of a solution to how are we going to address the refugee crisis. Who are truly asylum seekers? Who are trying to escape, economic downturns? Who are trying to, escape, famine and food shortages? I mean, all these things are going to make up a huge These are the questions that need to be asked of people that are being displaced. And where are they going to go to? And who's going to take them? And how many? And where are the lines that he talks about that are going to be drawn as to who makes the cut to come to the first world countries? Great questions. Let's continue and hear the other 4 that Douglas has to offer.
Third point. We know that some cultures find it easier to mix into other cultures than others, but we don't know exactly how. And we don't know what the proportions of people are in another culture that work well, integrate well, adapt well, and what the proportions are that start to make that integration, that adaptation far harder. We have thought very little about this, and what thinking there has been pretty bad. Let me give you another example of something we need to think about. How do we deal with a question this serious in the age of social media? An age when a single photograph of a single person can go all around the world, and everybody sees it, and everybody says something must be done. And their politicians think, I've got to do something. And then they do something, and the public say, no, that wasn't the something we were thinking of. We've thought of something else, but we don't know what. How do we live in that world? How do politicians act in that world? How do we have any form of political leadership in that world? How do we work out what the right thing to do is in that world? Not just in the short term, but in the long term too. I'll give you a 5th question. How do we ensure that we're able to have a serious and deep debate about these issues, and that we're able to allow people to express legitimate concerns and have that debate without those legitimate concerns being dismissed as xenophobic, nativist, and so on?
That's the big question right there, folks. That's the big question. Because as soon as you start to answer a person's question and you say, but how are we going to do it? We can't accept millions upon millions of people and overrun a country. How do we do it? But as soon as you even start to begin the discussion or begin the debate, what happens? The cards come flying out of the liberal and the leftist playbook, right? What cards are we talking about? The big one, the R card, racist. Oh, that's flipped over on the table all the time, racist. The B card, bigot. I card, Islamophobic. I mean, as soon as you start to question, just to even ask a simple question as to how, who, what, where, why, the labels start to hit upon you, and then people are shut down or quieted down by the mob mentality. And that's what, Douglas is saying here. We've got to be able to bring forth those questions, no matter how, hard they are or how difficult they are to ask, without worry about being ostracized or canceled or, whatever. Anyways, let's continue.
We work out where that might be the case, and how do we work out where it's not, where there are legitimate fears? 6th question, how do we overcome fatalism? The fatalism you hear everywhere these days, sometimes in the spirit of optimism. This is the world as it is now. People move. This is globalization. Get used to it. Suck it up. Don't complain. How do we get used to that? How do we deal with that? Now, I've got, rather unsurprisingly, fewer answers than I've got questions. But let me give you just 3 answers I would suggest that we could hold on to as the beginning of a set of answers to this. The first is, hold a very clear line between people fleeing for their lives from war zones and people fleeing economic deprivation. Find and hold to a very clear line on it. If you do not, I predict with absolute certainty that you will continue to erode public sympathy with people who need the sympathy the most, because these things will be rubbed together and elided. So I would suggest, first of all, find that and hold on to it pretty close. Second thing I would suggest, find a broad level of agreement, and there is a lot of this internationally now, that the best way to cope with the most serious situations is to keep people roughly in the area of the country for which they fled. It's much easier to look after them there. It's much easier to get international aid there. My own country, Great Britain, is, I think, the 2nd largest donor of international aid within the regions of Syria. That should, I think, be one of the models for this, that we make sure that we don't have this idea that some people have that you disperse X percentage there and X percentage there and put these people there. Thirdly, I would say make sure you increase economic productivity in refugee camps. Make sure people have a hope and a purpose and a work life when they're outside of their country. Look, I'm concluding with this because otherwise the music will get so loud you won't hear me. There are no simple answers to this, because there are no simple questions in this. This whole business does not give itself to sound bites, but it does need a much deeper debate than most of us have been willing to have so far. Thank you.
All right.
Wow, wow, wow. As I said before, I think Douglas Murray absolutely killed it. Hit it right out of the park, grand slam, whatever you want to call it. Succinctly put it down to points. If you were in the audience and you wanted to know how it's really done, this is the way it's done. He said, I'm going to give you 6 questions that need to be asked, hopefully give you some answers to those questions. He put those down. He went through them one by one. Then he said, here's some of the answers that I think may answer some of those questions, but it only probably brings up more questions as well. But compare that to, Marc Lamont, where he was just attacking institutions, attacking sovereign nations, talking about globalism, and that if you didn't do this thing, you somehow, he was implying being a racist, being a bigot. And instead of actually, asking those types of questions, giving some answers, giving some hope, Douglas Murray comes at it from a different, and if you take a look at that video again, you'll see when they were showing some images of Lamont, in the background, he was probably going, holy crap, what have I gotten myself into over here? But then again, I'm biased towards Douglas Murray. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host, Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel, like, share, and follow us. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And check out our video links above here and down here. I'll leave you with my final thought, which has always been, when you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.